Now, the organized private sector has expressed concern over its ability to pay the 70,000 naira new approved minimum wage, saying that private organizations are overburdened by the high cost of production. The federal government and Labour had finally reached an agreement on the new national minimum wage on Thursday, ending 3 years of tough negotiations on the matter. Reacting to the new minimum wage, the organized private sector commended the federal government over the measure, even as it called on the government to put in place reforms that will strengthen private sector to be able to pay. Meanwhile, the Nigeria Labour Congress says it accepted the proposal of 70,000 naira minimum wage from President Bola Tinubu because of other incentives attached to it, and a promise to review the package every 3 years as against what obtained in the past. Let's listen to the NLC President, Comrade Joe Ajaero, who was featured earlier on by my colleague on Arise.
Even by their submission, NECA, submitted that they are paying well. And we're talking of organized private sector. Those in organized private sector, if they are paying 70,000 as of today, I will be surprised. Clearly. But there are small and medium scale enterprises. Some of them may be battling. Some are equally doing better. But some of them may be battling to pay now. However, and let us take this clearly. If they were selling their products 1,000 naira when the last minimum wage was introduced at 30,000. Today, that product is going for 5,000. Now, there has been, each time there's any economic downturn, they adjust. There's no commodity that has remained, that has not moved up to 300 or 400%. Apart from labor that has been constant. If you are producing toothpaste, and then somebody that is earning 30,000 is expected to equally buy from when it was 1,000 to when it is 5,000. And we felt that if all other indices are moving up, there's no way you keep labor wage constant. And that's equally what has happened now. Some of them, their revenue has equally increased, with whether it is marginal increase or whatever, on the commodities they are producing. So I think they should be in a better position to cope with the realities of the moment.
NLC President, Comrade Joe Ajaero, right there. Well, to help us dissect the issues, we have joining us an economic policy analyst, Rabiu Hassan. He's also a member of the Arewa Economic Forum. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and joining us from our Lagos studios, an economic and financial expert, Dr. Ogunsola Akintunde. He's a senior partner at Kama Professional Services. Well, I'm being told that he will join us later. And we'll start with you right away. Rabiu Hassan, talk to us about what the NLC president was saying, that the organized private sector has no reason not to pay the 70,000 naira, even without government support, as they claim, because most of their products have witnessed a geometric increase in the past 1 year since the fuel subsidy was removed. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen. I think it is what we are seeing out of this fiasco, salary increment fiasco, represents exactly what we have seen in the previous other cycles. The same narrative on both sides, because government have always said it does not have sufficient resources to do that. And the organized labor argued and had consistently argued that the government has what it takes to do that. Yeah. And the political and economic outcome of all those negotiations, especially this one that had started since 2019 and upwards, we're talking of about 5 years. A cyclical kind of negotiations upon negotiations, a lot of political energy, a lot of, economic kind of analysis and analytics that have taken place. Yet, we landed with an increment that was actually accepted. But however, given the nature of the issues around minimum wage is in the exclusive legislative list, so it has to be a thing that had to be addressed by the federal government and equally from the center, and equally had to be backed by a legal instrument, that is by way of a law to be enacted. and what have you. And the subsequent other effects of this decision and all the processes that it will take to implement will definitely, we will come to see. But the suggestion by the private sector, the position of the private sector is a very valid position because given our various economic statistics that we know, I think it will greatly, in fact, create an impetus for the prices of goods to rise. Not because of the quantum of resources, that the increase in the capacity to consume, the marginal propensity to consume by workers all over the place, but already an economy that is so kind of shocked by consistent rise in the rate of inflation, and which over the first year of the administration, we have not seen any of the tools that are traditionally used to manage inflation working, basically. When we talk of the CBN initiatives, which has always remained very theoretical and theatrical, it doesn't actually, because if it has to, we would have seen some semblance of stability and then going down. And so, by and large, what we are looking at, this development, positive on one side, will definitely create some negativities.
Yeah, and that's what the organized private sector is saying, that actually this will put a lot of pressure on them. But you could hear the NLC president actually saying that, look, even before now, some private companies had already increased their salaries. But it's majorly the medium, small, and micro enterprises that are actually being faced with crisis. So what kind of support do you think that the organized private sector is seeking from the government? Because NECA, MAN, NASIMA, all of them are saying that, look, you need to help boost the economy, help provide some incentives for us to be able to retain the workers that we have, employ more, and then pay them. So what kind of incentives do you think the federal government can support the organized private sector with? Yeah.
If we look at the landscape, I mean the industrial sector, the manufacturing sector, restricting ourselves down to what the government will do in the short term to address this matter would only do some cosmetics, as I have always insisted. Now, the manufacturing sector is operating at an average of 54% over the last 8 years. Can you imagine? So we are looking. It's an industry. It's a sector of the economy that has been operating suboptimally by the rate. By that percentage, it tells you half of the capacity of our Nigerian industries is wasted, and the consequence and the reasons why we have this capacity wastage by way of the 54%, the average 54% that we're talking about, is because some of the economic fundamentals that need to be working and functioning and within normal limits, so that industries will work, will grow, will employ, will pay tax, and then the economy will rule and rule and rule over again, are not there. Inflation, the cost of energy, insecurity, every factor that you're looking at that makes it create a disincentive for somebody to do investments. It's always there. To go
into production.
It's always there. And
but what are the incentives that government could actually provide for them?
I'm sure the only incentive that can be easily, looked at by the government could be some fiscal incentives by way of looking at creating incentives in the sense that, and when you are talking of fiscal incentives, you're looking at some arrangement, some schemes of arrangement around modifying one tax rate or the other, depending on the specific conditions of the economy or the specific industry.
Tax break.
Tax break, tax holidays, and tax reduction, even though I would not see a situation where the government of the day will consider reducing taxes as to incentivize and reinforce the capacity of industries to pay salaries and meet the requirements of the new salary. But I have not equally seen sufficient kind of innovation in every of the salary increment exercise that we've gone through from 1981 upwards.
Wow.
The issue is every time the issue of salary increment has come in, it's always about increasing the salary from X naira to the next to Y naira. And while we believe, those of us that are now in the private sector believe there are so many other ways government can innovatively create additional incentives while equally increasing the salary to get the economy to work so that the government will go around and tax the income and make more money. Now, unfortunately, that is not what we have seen. Now, the statement of the chairman of the NLC is suggesting something.
Yeah, president of the NLC.
President of the NLC is suggesting that there is something which has refused to disclose some additional incentives. And for us Nigerians, the first thing that will flash your mind is that thing not worth mentioning?
Well, I mean, from investigations, it has to do with provision of more CNG buses, and then, of course, the minimum wage, which they have said is now going to be negotiated every 3 years, no longer 5 years, and then maybe other support.
But
whether
the NLC consider those incentives as sufficient enough, I think is another thing that will take us down. But what I would say is that if you're talking of the CNG thing is about creating an urban transportation kind of infrastructure that will be able to address the cost of transportation. At least workers would find some easy ways. But remember, in the aftermath of the removal of the subsidy, the Nigerian government promised Nigerians that it will spend a lot of money, XY amount of money, a very significant amount of money was said to be set aside for the purpose of putting buses around the land. I've not seen one yet.
Well, they said they're actually supporting unions and other organizations.
Exactly.
So I'll just ask you to hold on while we go to our Lagos studio, and we're now being joined by Dr. Akintunde Ogunsola as he comes into the conversation. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. And you are looking like one of the politicians in the house. All right, so talk to us about the organized private sector. I mean, how could they have been saying that they will need government support to pay this 70,000 naira when they were part of the conversations? I thought they were part of the committee set up by President Tinubu to discuss this new minimum wage.
All right, yes, that's true, actually. But, well, when I got that news, I just felt, oh, they are trying to play a kind of politics here. I think the private sector wants to use that to negotiate some other increases in the cost of doing business. That is why they said they need the government support. That since the salary is not going to be increased, the electricity tariff is already increased. So many other costs, taxes are being increased apart from the withholding tax now that has been, some waivers are being granted. So there is a lot of increase due to the inflation. So if they can use this salary increase to negotiate reducing the electricity tariff, they will also gain it from that side. That's why they are actually saying that, but not that they are not going to pay. 70,000 is even small compared to what their staff are actually going through. And I think most of the organized private sector are already paying more than 70,000. For some of them that are not paying up to that. So I think they just want to use that to negotiate some other things with the federal government.
Now, if you had listened to what Joe Ajero, the NLC president, said earlier when we started this conversation, you will hear him saying that there's no reason why the organized private sector cannot pay much more than this, because most of their products have witnessed more than 200 to 300% increase in the market. And so whatever they were selling, for example, at 100 naira is like at about 300, 400 naira. And so they should have enough capacity to be able to pay. Talk to us about this and what other incentives you think that the federal government can use to support manufacturers and others.
All right, I listened to the NLC president, on this particular issue. Yes. I agree with him to some extent, but I feel he's not really a business person to actually understand. Yes, the price of what they are selling or their product or services has gone up. Likewise, the inputs, the cost of buying those items have also gone up. So the only difference is still probably their profit margin. Their profit margin is now being eaten up by the other costs of running business, like the electricity, the other taxes that has been introduced, transportation, and all that. So that has eaten into that gross profit that they actually get, and that's why they are crying. It's not easy for people that are doing businesses, but they have also increased their prices. So by way of increasing their prices, they should be able to cover the cost of their salaries, the salary of their workers, so that the workers can have something that can motivate them to actually give in their best to actually do this work. The only fear I have is that this private sector, once they see that, the wage has increased, we can't pay, they can begin to fire some of the staff, and say, okay, sorry, we cannot be able to pay this. Let some people be laid off so that we can be able to pay others a bigger amount, because they have the power and the rights to hire and fire. So that's just the only area that, might be causing some fears. But talking about, just like what I said before, the organized private sector wants to use this wage increase to negotiate some other palliative in some other areas that the government can actually give to them, so that they can say, government, you fix salary for us at minimum of 70,000. Is already a lot for us. What can the government do, to help our businesses in this area of, in this period of inflation? What can the government do to help us to see that, yes, we recover in some areas as we are increasing salary on some areas? So they just want to use that as a tool of negotiation with the federal government, possibly to reduce the electricity tariff.
All right, so gentlemen, coming back to you here, Rabiu, what do you think 70,000 naira can actually do for an average worker in Nigeria today monthly? Especially those living in urban centers.
In urban centers. So an analysis of, there is what we call the wage, and then there is the real wage. The real wage actually looks more into what that can afford an average worker in terms of a basket of goods and services that he can. I mean, when you actually discount inflation and, of course, consider the purchasing power of that amount, 70,000 naira translates to $46 at current US dollar rate. So it tells you basically that every worker in Nigeria, I mean, the minimum wage earner in Nigeria will consistently continue to remain in poverty, on that poverty kind of given what this amount entails. And the fact that if you compare this figure with the figure, the last minimum wage increase during President Jonathan, that moved to 30,000 naira, you would probably see that the real wage, in terms of when you're factoring the real wage, you find that that increment done during President Jonathan afforded Nigerians better.
Yeah, I mean, it was, in terms of dollar terms, it was like about $116.
Exactly. In fact, it offered Nigerians better kind of, a bigger size of basket of goods and services, and when you compare it in dollar terms. And what would even give you kind of another serious thought is when you now compare that, what we have done after the 5 years of, political, economic energy and the moves and every hula baloo that we have done around moving the minimum wage from 30,000 to 70,000. Yes, it has increased by about 100 point something percent, but yet you compare that with the average minimum wage of our peer African countries, and that is what will give you some aches. In South Africa, the minimum wage is about the minimum wage of a South African is about 505,000 naira. When you now do the conversions.
Yeah, do the conversions.
Exactly, 500, because an average South African earns about 333 US dollar. That is the minimum wage. The same thing with Egypt. You are looking at an average wage of 367,000 naira. And then when you compare with Kenya, these are some of the peers. In Kenya, it's about 218,000, which means typically an average Nigerian worker that is on the threshold of the minimum wage is 3-4 times poorer In the case of Kenya, he's 3 times poorer. In the case of South Africa, he's 8 times poorer. In the case of Egypt, he's 6 times poorer than an average worker in Nigeria. Wow, now, when you add up these statistics, it tells you that after all the exercise, have we really achieved anything? And don't forget, from the Reforms Committee, the Tax and Fiscal Policy Reforms Committee, I am seeing signals that is telling me that typically, I know public servants and political holders, the easiest thing that they can do is to increase rates of taxes. That's very easy because you just announce.
The Tinubu government has been doing that.
You just announced the VAT that was placed for importation of AGO, which Lagos State has gotten a very big largesse out of it. And then after pressure, before they now remove it. And I'm sure that committee is considering, even though it's considering improving some efficiency in the tax fiscal policy system, definitely we would come to see that some rates of taxes are increased. And the moment that is done, like it was done during the immediate previous administration, where VAT was increased to 7.5%. And the moment anything is tinkered with any of these taxes, it will basically negative the effect of all that has been done.
All right, very important submission there. Now we'll come to you, Dr. Ogunsola. You have heard all of this. In terms of dollar rates, we've just ended up going down and down since 2011 when we had that 18,000 naira minimum wage. So what exactly can 70,000 naira do for the average Nigerian worker, especially those in the private sector who don't have much incentives and allowances like their colleagues in the public sector?
Well, if I will respond to that, you see, when we begin to convert exchange rates to the other countries and all that, well, I always beg to differ from that a little, because I was in Kenya this year, even when the naira was at about 1,700, to a dollar, and I bought a bottle of water in Kenya for 200 shillings, which when I converted it to naira, I was like, this can never happen in Nigeria. For me to buy a bottle of water at that amount, 200 shillings, 200 Kenya shillings. At that time, I think $100 was about 14,000 shillings, while in naira it was about 170,000. So the purchasing power actually differs when you take it local. Yes, we know that. I also heard the senator said just 70,000 is even less than a bag of rice, that how much can that purchase? Yes, but I think it's still better than where we are coming from. We are coming from 30,000. How were they coping in the last 1 year when minimum wage was still 30,000? Thank God for the palliatives that the government gave, the 30,000 naira wage award. That also helped them. But now we've been able to achieve something. We know that it's not enough, but the country is still borrowing. Do we want to go back to the era that the country will have to go and be borrowing? Yes, we know there might be a lot of mismanagement in the fund of government. The savings from the fuel subsidy and other funds that we're expecting that we're going to get, and government has decided that they will divert those funds for infrastructural development, rather than just paying salaries. So we've actually achieved something. From there, thank God the president said every three years is going to be reviewed. Possibly by the time we are going to be reviewing it, the value of our currency will have, gotten stronger, by what the CBN is doing. Maybe inflation will have gone down. So it's a different thing when we talk about the purchasing power of the naira, comparing that to the, wages. At least in Nigeria, we can still buy a plate of food for 500 naira. And have at least a meal.
Well, that will actually be in very, very local restaurants actually for 500 naira. But well, as we try to round off this,
yes, at least we can eat.
As we try to round off this conversation, Dr. Ogunsola, do you share the view expressed by Rabiu here that the government needs to provide huge tax incentives for companies to be able to allow these companies to retain and not fire, like you yourself have said earlier?
Oh, yes. Even before now, when subsidy was removed, I also advised government that, okay, for persons that are, on the very low cadre of government payroll and even in the private sector, they should be exempted from the personal income tax. so that will be a waiver for them. Not that they are getting 70,000 and then their government will collect it back again from, them paying their personal income tax. It comes down, the money, gets to reduce again. So I think government should consider a waiver of personal income tax for some, cadre of staff, and also for the small and medium scale enterprises. Their staff should get a waiver from paying personal income tax to their states. That's a very good, another way to ensure that the monies, this 70,000 being paid to them, doesn't deplete, because we're already calculating how they will spend 70,000 now. But I can tell you, by the time they will pay them, it will be net of taxes, and this money will still further go down. So government should consider a waiver of personal income tax, for some, level, maybe from level 6 or 7 downwards.
All right, Rabiu, do you share his views?
I think
very quickly as we try to wrap up the conversation.
Addressing personal income tax, I think the issue was about the incentive to the businesses,
yes,
not to the individuals.
Yes, but he
personal income tax is going to support the income of workers basically, but to the corporates, I think the more relevant taxes should now be the corporate income tax, the import duties, kind of those tax that actually matter on cost of production, as against then corporate income tax, tax holidays, tax waivers. I mean, and so many. There are a lot of things that our tax authorities can think.
Yeah, but how do we ensure they don't abuse it?
No,
because we've seen,
exactly. That is one very fundamental. I mean, we know that one of the biggest things that in Nigeria, we have some of the best things to do, but when it comes to implementation, and that is where we have a lot of issues. Exactly.
All right, gentlemen, we must thank you so much for joining us. Rabiu has been helping us to understand some of the issues that have been raised by all of this here. Rabiu Hassan is an economic policy analyst and a member of the Arewa Economic Forum. We must thank you so much for joining us to help us shed light on these issues. And of course, Dr. Ogunsola Akintunde is a senior partner at Karma Professional Services, and he has been joining us from our Lagos studio to help us understand the issues. And I hope you're enjoying yourself in Lagos. Looks like you're doing some Owambe right there in Lagos. Best wishes to most. Thank you so much for joining us to help us understand the issues.